don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that was a Bigfoot. Let me tell you a story. These stories are based upon true events. Every once in a while, the classic stories pop up in the most unexpected places. This particular story gets featured in a lot in passing, but it's time he gets his very own Bigfoot campfire story. Albert was a prospector in British Columbia, and he had been on an epic trek to locate a secret gold stash. He had been having his camp invaded by something at night. Too bad that wasn't the only thing that happened. This is his story. We pick up Albert on day 5 at his final campsite. I found an exceptionally good campsite. It was 2 good-sized cypress trees growing close together and near a rock wall with a nice spring just below the trees. I intended to make this my permanent camp. I cut lots of brush for my bed between these trees. I rigged up a pole with this rock wall to hang my pack sack on, and I arranged some flat rocks for the fireplace for cooking. I had a really classy setup, and that is when things began to happen. I am a heavy sleeper. Not much disturbs me after I go to sleep, especially on a good bed like I had now. Next morning, I noticed things had been disturbed during the night, but nothing missing I could see. Well, I roasted my grouse on a stick for breakfast. That night I filled up the magazine of my rifle, and I had 1 full box of 20 shells and 6 shells in my coat pocket. That night, I laid the rifle under the edge of my sleeping bag. I thought a porcupine had visited me the night before, and porkies like leather, so I put my shoes in the bottom of my sleeping bag as well. Next morning, my pack sack had been emptied out. Someone had turned the sack upside down. It was still hanging on the pole from the shoulder straps as I had hung it up. Then I noticed 1 half-pound package of prunes was missing. Also, my pancake flour was missing, but my salt bag was not touched. Porkies always look for the salt. I decided it must be something else than porkies. I looked for tracks, but found none. I did not think it was a bear. They always tear up and make a mess of things. I kept close to the camp these days, in case the visitor would come back. I climbed up on a big rock where I had a good view of the camp, but nothing showed up. I was hoping it would be a porky so I could get good porky stew. These visits had now been going on for 3 nights. This night it was cloudy and looked like it might rain. I took special notice of how everything was arranged. I closed my pack sack. I did not undress. I only took off my shoes and put them in the bottom of my sleeping bag. I drove my prospecting pick into one of the cypress trees, and I could reach it from my bed. I also put the rifle alongside me inside the sleeping bag. I fully intended to stay awake all night to find out who my visitor was, but I must have fallen asleep. Next thing I know, I was awakened by something picking me up. I was half asleep at first. I did not remember where I was. As I began to get with my wits together, I remembered I was on this prospecting trip and in my sleeping bag. My first thought was, it must be a snowslide, but there was no snow around my camp. Then it felt like I was tossed on horseback, but I could feel whoever it was walking. I tried to reason with what kind of animal this could be. I tried to get out my sheath knife and cut my way out, but I was in an almost sitting position, and the knife was under me. I could not get hold of it. But the rifle was in front of me. I had a good hold of that, and no intention to let it go of it. At times, I could feel my pack sack touching me, and I could feel the cans of the sack touching my back. After what seemed like an hour, I could feel we were going up a steep hill. I could feel myself rise for every step. What was carrying me was breathing hard and sometimes gave a slight cough. Now I knew there must be one of the mountain Sasquatch giants the Indians told me about. I was in a very uncomfortable position, unable to move. I was sitting on my feet, and one of the boots in the bottom of the bag was crossways in the hobnail sole up across my foot. It hurt me terribly, but I could not move. It was very hot inside. It was lucky for me that this fellow's hand was not big enough to close up the whole bag whenever he picked me up. There was a small opening at the top, otherwise I probably would have choked to death. And now he was going downhill. I could feel myself touching the ground at times. At one time, he dragged me behind him, and I could feel he was below me. Then he seemed to get on level ground and was going at a trot for a long time. By this time, I had cramps in my legs. The pain was terrible. I was wishing that he would get into his destination soon. I could not stand this type of transportation much longer. And now he was going uphill again. It did not hurt me quite so bad. I tried to estimate distance and directions. As near as I could guess, we were about 3 hours traveling. I had no idea when he started, as I was asleep when he picked me up. Finally, he stopped and let me down. Then he dropped my pack sack. I could hear the cans rattle. Then I heard chatter, some kind of talk I did not understand. The ground was slopping, so when he let go of my sleeping bag, I rolled downhill. I got my head out and got some air. I tried to straighten my legs and crawl out, but my legs were just too numb. It was still dark. I could not see what my captors looked like. I tried to manage my legs to get them some life in them and get my shoes on. I could hear now it was at least 4 of them. They were standing around me and continuously chattering. I've never heard of Sasquatch before. The Indian told me about them, but I knew I was right among them. But how to get away from them? That was another question. I got to see the outline of them now as it began to get later. Though the sky was cloudy, it looked like rain. In fact, there was a slight sprinkle. I now had some circulation in my legs, but my left foot was very sore on top where it had been resting on my hobnail boots. I got my boots out of the sleeping bag and tried to stand up. I found I was wobbly on my feet, but I had a good hold of my rifle. I asked, "What you fellows want with me?" I only got some more chatter. It was getting lighter now, and I could see them quite clearly. I could make out forms of 4 people, 2 big and 2 little ones. They were all covered with hair, no clothes on at all. I could make out the mountains around me. I looked at my watch, and it was 4:25 a.m. It was getting lighter now, and I could see these people clearly. They looked like a family. Old man, old lady, and 2 young ones, a boy and a girl. The boy and the girl seemed to be scared of me. The old lady did not seem pleased about what the old man dragged home, but the old man was waving his arms and telling them what he had on his mind. Well, they all left me then. I had my compass and my prospecting glasses on strings around my neck, the compass in my left shirt pocket, and my glass was in my right-hand pocket. Well, I tried to reason our location and where I was. I could see now that I was in a small valley or basin, about 8 or 10 acres, surrounded by high mountains. On the southeast side, there was a V-shaped opening and about 8 foot wide at the bottom, about 20 feet high at the highest point. That must have been the way I came in. But how will I get out? The old man was now sitting near this opening. Well, I moved my belongings up to the closest west wall. There were 2 small cypress trees there, and this will do for a shelter for the time being, till I find out what these people want with me and how to get away from here. I emptied out my pack sack to see what I had left in the line of food. All my canned meat and vegetables were intact, and I had 1 can of coffee. Also 3 small cans of milk, 2 packages of Rye King, hardtack, and my butter sealer half full of butter. But my prunes, my macaroni were missing. Also my full box of shells for my rifle. I had my sheath knife, but my prospecting pick was missing and my can of matches. I only had a safety box full, and they held only about a dozen matches. That did not worry me. I can always start a fire with a prospecting glass when the sun is shining, if I got dry enough wood. I wanted hot coffee, but I had no wood, and also nothing around here that looked like wood. I had a good look over the valley from where I was, but the boy and the girl were always watching me from behind some juniper bush. I decided there must be some water around here. The ground was leaning towards the opening in the wall. Well, there must be water at the upper end of this valley. There's a green grass and moss growing along the bottom. All my utensils were left behind. I opened my coffee tin and emptied the coffee into a dish towel and tied it up with a metal strip from the can. I took my rifle and the can and went looking for water. Right at the head under a cliff there was a lovely spring that disappeared under the ground. Well, I got a drink and a full can of water. When I got back, the young boy was looking over my belongings. He didn't touch anything. On my way back, I noticed where these people were sleeping. was on the east side wall of the valley where there was a shelf in line with the mountainside overhanging a rock, looking something like a big undercut of a big tree about 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide. The floor was covered with lots of dry moss and then had some kind of blankets woven with narrow strips of cedar bark and packed with dry moss. They looked very practical and warm, with no need of washing. The first day, not much happened. I had to eat my food cold. The young fellow was coming near me and seemed curious about me. My one stuff box was empty, so I relayed it toward him. And when he saw it, he came. He sprang up quick as a cat and grabbed it. He went over to his sister and showed her. They found out how to open and close it. They spent a long time playing with it. And then he trotted over to the old man and showed him, and they had a long chatter. The next morning, I made up my mind to leave this place. If I had to shoot my way out, I could not stay much longer. I only had enough grub to last me till I got back to Toba Inlet, and I did not know the direction, but I would go downhill, and I would come out near civilization someplace. I rolled up my sleeping bag, put that inside my pack sack, packed the few cans I had, swung the sack over my back, injected the shell into the barrel of my rifle, and started for the opening in the wall. Well, the old man got up, held his hands as though he would push me back. I pointed to the opening. I wanted to go out, but he stood there pushing towards me. He said something that sounded like, "Soka, Soka." Well, I backed up about 60 feet. I did not want to be too close. I thought if I had to shoot my way out, a 30-30 might not have much effect on this fellow. It might make him mad. I only had 6 shells, so I decided to wait. There must be a better way than killing him in order to get out of here. Well, I went back to my campsite to figure out some other way to get out. I could make friends with one of the young fellow or the girl. Maybe they might help me, if I could talk to them. Well, then I thought of a fellow who saved himself from a muddy bull by blinding him with snuff in his eyes. But how will I get near enough to this fellow to put snuff in his eyes? So I decided next time I give the young fellow my snuff box to leave a few grains of snuff in it. He might give it the old man a taste of it. The other question is, what direction will I go if I should get out? I must have been 25 miles northeast of Toba Inlet when I was kidnapped. This fellow must have traveled at least 25 more in the 3 hours he carried me. If he went west, we might be near salt water, same thing as if he went south. Therefore, he must have gone northeast. If then keep going south over the 2 mountains, I must hit salt water someplace between Lund and Vancouver. The following day, I did not see the old lady till about 4 p.m. She came home with her arms full of grass and twigs and all kinds of spruce and hemlock, as well as some kind of nuts that grow in the ground. I've seen lots of them on Vancouver Island. Well, the young fellow went up the mountain to the east every day. He could climb better than a mountain goat. He picked some kind of grass with long, sweet roots. He gave me some one day. They tasted very sweet. I gave him another snuff box with about a teaspoon of snuff in it. He tasted it and then went to the old man. He licked it with his tongue. They had a long chat. I made a dipper from my milk can, and I made many dippers. You could use them for pots, too. You cut 2 slits near the top of any can, then cut a limb from any small tree. Cut down the back of the limb down the stem of the tree, then taper the part you want to cut from the stem. Then cut a hole in the tapered part. Slide that tapered part in the slit you've made in the can, and you can have a good handle for your can. I threw one over to the young fellow that was playing near my camp. He picked it up, then looked at it, then went to the old man and showed it to him. They had a longer chat. Then he came to me, pointed at the dipper at his sister. I could see that he wanted one for her, too. I had other peas and carrots, so I made one for his sister. He was standing only 8 feet away from me when I had made the dipper. I dipped it in the water and drank from it, and he was very pleased, almost smiled at me, then took a chew of stuff, smacked my lips, said, "That's good." The young fellow pointed to the old man and said something sounded like, "Ook." I got the idea that the old man liked snuff, and the young fellow wanted a box for the old man. I shook my head. I motioned with my hands for the old man to come over to me. I don't think the young fellow understood what I meant. He went to his sister and gave her the dipper I'd made for her. They didn't come near me again that day. I had now been there 6 days, but I was sure I was making progress. If only I could get the old man to come over to me, get him to eat a full box of snuff. Well, that would kill him for sure, and that way I can get out of here and won't be guilty of murder. The old lady was a meek thing. The young fellow was by this time quite friendly. The girl would not hurt anyone. Her chest was flat like a boy's, no development like young ladies. I'm sure if I could get the old man out of the way, I could easily have brought this girl out to me to civilization. But what good would that have been? I could have kept her in a cage for public display. I don't think we have any right to force our way to life on people, and I don't think they would like it. The young fellow might have been 18 years old and about 7 feet tall, might weigh about 300 pounds. His chest would have been 50 to 55 inches, his waist about 36 to 38 inches. He had wide jaws, a narrow forehead that slanted upward around the back, 4 or 5 inches higher than the forehead. The hair on their heads was about 6 inches long. The hair on the rest of the body was short and thick in places. The woman's hair on the forehead was an upward turn like some women have. They call it bangs. Among women's hairdos nowadays, the old lady could have been anything between 40 and 70 years old. She too was over 7 feet tall and would have been about 500 to 600 pounds. She had very wide hips and a goose-like walk. She was not built for beauty, but speed. Some of those lovable braziers and uplifters would have been great improvement on her looks and her figure. The man's 8 teeth were longer than the rest of the teeth, but not long enough to be called tusks. The old man must have been near 8 feet tall. Big barreled chest, hump on his back, powerful shoulders. His biceps on his upper arms were enormous and tapered down to his elbows. His forearms were longer than the common people have, but well proportioned. His hands were wide, and the palm as long as a board, and the hollow like scoop. His fingers were short in proportion to the rest of his hand. His fingernails were like chisels. The only place they had no hair was inside their hands and on the soles of their feet and the upper part of their nose and eyelids. I never did see their ears. They were covered with hair hanging over them. The old man, if he were to wear a collar, it would have been at least 30 inches. I have no idea what size shoes they would need. I was watching the young fellow's foot one day when he was sitting down. The soles of his feet seemed to be padded like a dog's foot. The big toe was longer than the rest and very strong. In mountain climbing, all he needs was footing for his big toe. They were very agile. To sit down, they turned their knees and came out straight down. To rise, they came straight up without help from their hands or their arms. I don't think this valley was their permanent home. I think they moved from place to place as food is available in different localities. They might eat meat, but I never saw them eat meat or do any cooking. I think this was probably a stopover place, and the plants and the sweet roots on the mountainside might have been in season this time of year. They seem to be most interested in those. The roots have a very sweet and satisfying taste. They always seem to do everything for a reason. Wasted no time on anything they did not need. When they were not looking for food, the old man and the old lady were resting, but the boy and the girl were always climbing something or some other exercise. A favorite position was to take hold of his feet and his hands and balance on his rump, then bounce forward. The idea seems to be see how far he could go without his feet or hands touching the ground. Sometimes he made 20 feet. But what do they want from me? They must understand I cannot stay here indefinitely. I will soon have to make my break for freedom. Not that I was mistreated in any way. One consolation was the old man was coming closer each day and was very interested in my snuff. Watching me when I take a pinch of snuff, he seems to think it useless to only put it inside my lips. Only one morning after I had my breakfast, both the old man and the boy came and sat only 10 feet away from me. This morning I made coffee. I saved up a bunch of dry branches I found, and I had some dry moss, and I used all the labels from the cans to start a fire. I got my coffee pot boiling, and it was strong coffee too, and the aroma from boiling coffee was what brought them over. I was sitting eating hardtack with plenty of butter on it, and sipping coffee, and it sure tasted good. I was smacking my lips, pretending it was better than it really was. I set the can down and was about half full. I intended to warm it up later. Well, I pulled out a full box of stuff, took a big chew, and had 2 more boxes. Before I had time to close the box, the old man reached for it. I was afraid he would waste it. So I held on to the box, intending him to take a pinch like I had just done. Instead, he grabbed the box and emptied it in his mouth, swallowed it in one gulp, and then he licked the inside of the box clean with his tongue. Well, after a few minutes, his eyes began to roll over in his head. He was looking straight up. I could see he was sick. Then he grabbed my coffee can, and it was quite cold by this time, and he emptied that in his mouth, grounds and all. That did no good. He stuck his head between his legs and rolled forward a few times away from me. Then he began to squeal like a stuck pig. I grabbed my rifle. I said to myself, this is it. If he comes for me, I'll shoot him plumb between the eyes. But he started for the spring. He wanted water. Well, I packed my sleeping bag and my pack sack with a few cans I had left. The young fellow ran over to his mother. Then she began to squeal. I started for the opening in the wall, and I just made it. The old lady was right behind me. I fired one shot at the rock over her head. I guess she had never seen a rifle before. She turned and ran inside the wall. I injected another shell into my barrel of the rifle and started downhill, looking back over my shoulder every so often to see if they were coming. I was in a canyon, and good traveling. I made fast time. I must have made 3 miles in some world record time. I came to a turn in the canyon, and I had the sun on my left. That meant I was going south, and the canyon turned west. I decided to climb the ridge right ahead of me. I knew that I must have 2 mountain ridges between me and the salt water, and climbing this ridge, I'd have a good view of this canyon so I could see if the Sasquatch were coming after me. Well, I had a light pack and was making good time up this hill. I stopped soon after to look back where I came from, but nobody followed me. As I came over the ridge, I could see Mount Baker. Then I knew I was going the right direction. I was hungry and tired. I opened my pack sack to see what I had to eat. I decided to rest here for a while. I had a good view of the mountainside, and if the old man was coming, I had the advantage because I was up above him. To get me, he'd have to come up a steep hill, and that might not be so easy after stopping for a few 30-30 bullets. I had made up my mind that this was my last chance, and this would be a fight to the finish. I rested here for 2 hours. It was 3 p.m. when I started down the mountainside. It was nice going, not too steep, and not too much underbrush. When I got near the bottom, I shot a big blue grouse. She was sitting on a windfall, looking right at me, only 100 feet away. Shot her neck clean off. Well, I made it down the creek at the bottom of this canyon. I felt I was safe now. I made a fire between 2 big boulders and roasted the grouse. The next morning when I woke up, I was feeling terrible. My feet were sore from dirty socks. My legs were sore. My stomach was upset from the grouse that I ate the night before. I was not too sure I was going to make it up that mountain. I finally made it to the top, but it took me 6 hours to get there. It was cloudy. Visibility was only about a mile. Well, I knew I had to go downhill. After about 2 hours, I got down to the heavy timber and sat down to rest. I could hear a motor running. It was running hard at times and then stopped. I listened to this for a while and decided the sound was from a gas donkey. Someone was logging in the neighborhood. I told them I was a prospector and I was lost. I did not like to tell them I'd been kidnapped by a Sasquatch, as if I had told them, they probably would have said he's crazy too. The following day, I went down from this camp on Salmon Arm Branch of Schelt Inlet, and from there, I got on the Union boat back to Vancouver. That was my last prospecting trip, and my only experience was what is known as Sasquatches. I know that in 1924 there were 4 Sasquatches living. It might only be 2 now. The old man and the old lady might be dead long ago. Well, Albert Ostman was his name, and a few things we still refer to from his descriptions of Bigfoot, such as the Ostman's pad, the gray-looking soft tissue on the bottom of the Sasquatch foot. As far as his encounter goes, it's been retold for over 60 years for a reason. Thanks for listening. I'm Reverend Jeff, and may the Squatch be with you.